In January 2007, Mike Lazaridis stood on a treadmill in his home in Waterloo, Ontario, watching a televised report about a product launch in San Francisco. On the screen, Steve Jobs held up a small glass rectangle and dragged a map across it with one finger. Then he downloaded a song. Then he opened a full web browser, the real internet, rendered on a phone. Lazaridis stepped off the treadmill and stopped watching as a curious engineer. He started watching as a man seeing a threat. He was the co-founder of Research in Motion, the company that made the BlackBerry, and he had built his entire empire on a single certainty, that no phone could do what he had just watched a phone do. Then the broadcast cut to a second man joining Jobs on the stage, Stanley Sigman, the chief executive of Singular Wireless, the carrier soon to be folded into AT&T, announcing a multi-year exclusive contract to sell the iPhone. Lazaridis felt the second shock land harder than the first. It is going to collapse the network, he thought. No carrier would ever let a single device pull that much raw data straight off the open internet. And yet, AT&T just had. The next morning he walked into the office, found his co-chief executive Jim Balsillie, and pulled him in front of a computer to replay the webcast. "Jim, I want you to watch this," he said. "They put a full web browser on that thing. The carriers will not even let us do that." Balsillie's first instinct was not fear, but accounting. It meant RIM might be losing AT&T as a customer. "These guys are really, really good," Lazaridis said. "This is different." "It is okay," Balsillie answered. "We will be fine. Remember that sentence. Everything that follows is the story of how wrong it was." That conversation, in a corporate office in a quiet Canadian city, in the first weeks of 2007, was the moment BlackBerry began to die. You would not have known that from looking at the company at the time. BlackBerry in 2007 was not struggling. BlackBerry in 2007 was the most dominant name in mobile communication on Earth. The device sat in the pocket of every banker, every lawyer, every senior executive, and a newly elected president of the United States who fought his own security agencies for the right to keep his. When the iPhone launched, RIM reported a subscriber base of around 10 million. Within 3 years, that number would more than quadruple. By 2009, the company would control close to 50% of the entire United States smartphone market and roughly 20% of the global smartphone operating system market. Its devices were selling so fast, it was adding millions of users every quarter. That same year, Fortune named Research in Motion the fastest-growing company in the world, and the BlackBerry Curve became the best-selling smartphone in the United States. The phones were so compulsive that the press coined a nickname for them that entered ordinary speech, the Crackberry. People did not simply use a BlackBerry, they were dependent on it. The little red notification light that blinked when a new message arrived trained an entire professional class to reach for their pockets every few minutes, in meetings, at dinner tables, at funerals. The dependence reached the very top. When Barack Obama won the presidency in 2008, the United States Secret Service and government lawyers tried to take his BlackBerry away, citing security and record-keeping law. He fought them and won a specially secured version, and the standoff became a national news story. A president of the United States went to war with his own security apparatus rather than surrender the device. There is no clearer measure of how completely BlackBerry had embedded itself into the machinery of serious life. To understand how a company that dominant could collapse almost completely within a single decade, you have to understand what BlackBerry actually was. You have to understand why the very things that made it untouchable were the things that killed it. To find out, we have to go back to the beginning, Waterloo, Ontario. 1984. Mike Lazaridis was a 23-year-old engineering student at the University of Waterloo, the kind of person who had built a working oscilloscope and a computer while still in high school. He was a tinkerer in the oldest, most literal sense of the word. He needed to open things up and understand exactly how they ran. That year, before he had even finished his degree, he won a small contract from General Motors and used the money to start a company with a university friend in a cramped office above a bagel shop. He called it Research in Motion. The name meant nothing in particular. The ambition behind it meant everything. For its first decade, the company built obscure, unglamorous things: barcode readers, network modems, systems for pushing data across radio frequencies that nobody outside a handful of industries had ever heard of. The money was thin, and the work was hard. And there were stretches in those early years when the company nearly ran out of cash entirely, surviving on contract work, and the stubbornness of a founder who refused to build anything he considered mediocre. This is the detail that matters most about that first decade. RIM was not a phone company. It was a wireless data company. And that distinction, invisible to outsiders, would shape everything the company became, for better and then for worse. The founding insight arrived in the late 1990s, and it was the kind of observation that looks obvious only after someone has had it. Lazaridis understood something the giants of the mobile industry had completely missed. People on the move did not most want to make phone calls. People on the move wanted to send messages. Email, specifically. Short, instant, secure, constant. In 1999, RIM released the BlackBerry 850, a device that looked like a fat pager with a tiny keyboard beneath a small green screen, and it did one thing better than anything else alive. It delivered email to your hand the instant it arrived, anywhere, reliably, over a network that RIM controlled itself end to end. The keyboard was the genius of it, and it was no accident. Lazaridis obsessed over the placement and shape of every single key, sculpting each one with a subtle ridge so a human thumb could find it by feel alone without ever looking down. You could type a full, coherent sentence while walking briskly down a corridor. For a lawyer billing in 6-minute increments or a trader who lived and died by the second, this was not a convenience. It was a transformation in how work itself happened. The device collapsed the distance between a thought and a sent message to almost nothing. The corporate world did not adopt the BlackBerry, it surrendered to it. By the early 2000s, entire investment banks, white shoe law firms, and government departments had standardized on the device, issuing one to every employee who mattered. They were not buying a phone. They were buying into a closed, secure system that ran on RIM's own private infrastructure, a network so trusted that intelligence agencies and heads of state relied on it for sensitive communication. The United States government built whole security protocols around it, and RIM had survived a moment that should have ended it. In the early 2000s, a small patent-holding firm called NTP sued RIM, claiming the BlackBerry's core email technology infringed its patents. And a United States court came within a hair of ordering the entire BlackBerry network shut down inside the country. For months, the millions of executives and officials addicted to their devices faced the real prospect of their screens going dark. RIM eventually paid more than $600 million to make the threat disappear. The company had stared at its own extinction and bought its way out, and the lesson it took from surviving was that BlackBerry was simply too essential, too embedded, too necessary to fail. That belief was a comfort in 2005. It would become a blindfold by 2009. By 2007, the year Steve Jobs walked onto that stage, BlackBerry had become a verb, a status symbol, and a corporate standard all at once. The company that started above a bagel shop was worth tens of billions of dollars. Lazaridis and Balsillie ran it together as co-chief executives. One, the obsessive visionary engineer. The other, the aggressive, relentless dealmaker, and for 20 years their partnership had been close to flawless. They had built something that looked, from the inside and the outside, completely permanent. To understand why that partnership then failed so completely and so fast, you need to understand what the secure network and the physical keyboard actually meant to BlackBerry's business. They were not features. They were the entire financial and strategic model of the company. This is the part that most people miss. BlackBerry did not really sell phones. It sold a system, and it rented access to that system forever. Every BlackBerry on Earth routed its email through RIM's own network operations centers, and the carriers paid RIM a recurring service fee for every single subscriber riding on that infrastructure, month after month, year after year. This was the most beautiful kind of business there is. It was recurring, it was high margin, and it grew automatically every time another corporation handed out another tray of devices. The hardware was almost a delivery mechanism for the fees, and the whole machine ran on efficiency. The BlackBerry was engineered to sip data and conserve battery so that it would work flawlessly even on weak, congested, expensive networks. The phones lasted for days on a single charge. They compressed every message to a fraction of its size. They encrypted everything. Every design decision in the entire company pointed at 3 pillars: battery life, keyboard speed, and network security. Those three pillars were the source of all of RIM's power and all of its profit. And they were about to become the bars of a cage. Because the iPhone did not respect a single one of those three things. It had famously poor battery life, often demanding a charge before the workday was finished. It had no physical keyboard at all, only a flat, featureless pane of glass that BlackBerry loyalists found maddening and slow to type on. And in BlackBerry's eyes, it was dangerously insecure. A device that pulled enormous quantities of data straight off the open public internet, rather than through a controlled, compressed, private channel. By every single metric BlackBerry used to judge a phone, the iPhone was worse. Lazaridis was a genuinely brilliant engineer, and his engineering judgment was, on the narrow facts, correct. The conclusion he drew from that correct judgment was catastrophically wrong. This is not a story about a company that failed to understand technology. It is a story about what happens when your deepest expertise becomes the thing that blinds you. There was a second trap hidden inside the first, and it was even harder to see. The iPhone, and the Android phones that followed it, were not really competing on hardware at all. They were building app ecosystems, vast libraries of software written by outside developers, and every app made the platform more valuable, which attracted more developers, which produced more apps. It was a self-reinforcing loop, and BlackBerry was not in it. Developers wrote for iPhone and Android first because that was where the users and the money were, and they barely wrote for BlackBerry at all. A BlackBerry could send a secure email faster than anything on Earth, but it could not run the games, the maps, the streaming apps, and the thousand small conveniences that ordinary people now expected. RIM had built the finest tool in the world for a job the market was quietly redefining. The keyboard solved a problem people had largely stopped having. The secure network protected against a threat most consumers never thought about. The efficiency saved a battery life that customers had decided they would happily sacrifice. Every strength was an answer to yesterday's question. In the summer of 2007, Lazaridis did what tinkerers always do. He got hold of an iPhone and pried it open to see what was actually inside. What he found genuinely shocked him. Apple had not built a phone. "They have put a Mac in this thing," he marveled. Apple had stuffed a small Macintosh computer into a handset, an operating system using around 700 megabytes of memory, more than 22 times the raw computing power of a BlackBerry. He turned to his staff and said something that, in hindsight, proves he saw the danger more clearly than almost anyone on Earth. "If that thing catches on," he told them, "we are not competing with Nokia anymore. We are competing with a Mac." He understood the new battleground perfectly. The war was no longer about messaging. It was about mobile computing, and he had just held the future in his hands and looked inside it. And here is the forensic heart of the entire story. BlackBerry's leadership saw exactly what was coming. They were not blind, and they were not ignorant. Larry Conley, Lazaridis' most trusted lieutenant, summed up the internal verdict by listing the iPhone's flaws. It was not secure. It had rapid battery drain. It had a poor keyboard. Every word of that assessment was true. But the company used those truths to comfort itself rather than to warn itself. Publicly, Lazaridis and Balsillie belittled the device at every opportunity. "You position your strengths against their weaknesses," Lazaridis later explained. "That is just marketing." The fatal problem was that they slowly began to believe their own marketing. They convinced themselves that the iPhone would appeal only to consumers who wanted to watch videos and browse the web. Frivolous people who did not care about the serious, secure, professional work that BlackBerry was built for. Their core corporate market, they were certain, was safe. And so, a company with every resource it could possibly need, a company that had seen the threat with its own eyes and named it out loud, made the quiet decision to defend what it already had instead of building the thing that was coming for it. That decision was rational in the short term. It was fatal in the long term. Every choice that followed would make a terrible kind of sense. In June 2007, the first real warning arrived from an unexpected direction, and it came wrapped as an opportunity. The iPhone had launched exclusively on AT&T in the United States. That arrangement left Verizon Wireless, one of the two largest carriers in the country, completely frozen out and suddenly desperate for an answer of its own. Verizon executives came directly to RIM with a simple, enormous request. "Build us an iPhone killer. Build us a phone with a large touchscreen and no physical keyboard, and we will put the full distribution weight of our entire network behind it. This was the moment everything turned on. Picture the room. It is the back half of 2007. RIM is at the absolute height of its power, adding millions of subscribers a quarter, the most admired technology company in Canada and one of the most admired on Earth. Across the table sits one of the largest carriers in America, holding the door to the next decade wide open and practically begging RIM to walk through it, guaranteed distribution included. All RIM has to do is let go of the keyboard. All RIM has to do is build, with total commitment, the kind of device its own founder had already identified as the future. The opportunity is perfect, the timing is perfect, and RIM cannot do it. RIM walked through that open door backward. The company agreed to build Verizon's phone, but it could not bring itself to truly abandon the thing that had made it great. The result, released in 2008, was the BlackBerry Storm, and the Storm was an attempt to have everything at once and surrender nothing. RIM's engineers designed a touchscreen that physically clicked when you pressed it, a moving pane of glass mounted on a button, engineered to replicate the tactile satisfaction of the beloved keyboard. It was a brilliant piece of engineering and a perfect symbol of the company's paralysis, a device built by people who could not let go. The conclusion that the keyboard mattered had been correct for a decade. The lesson RIM drew from it, that the keyboard must be preserved at any cost, was now hauling the company in precisely the wrong direction, at precisely the wrong moment. But it gets worse. The Storm was not only a strategic mistake, it was a catastrophe of execution. Verizon set an aggressive launch deadline, and RIM, racing to meet it, shipped a product that was simply not finished. The web browser was slow. The clicking screen failed to register presses near its corners. And worst of all, the devices froze and stopped working with miserable regularity. On the strength of the BlackBerry name alone, the Storm sold more than 1 million units in its first 2 months, the best-selling launch the company had ever recorded. It was the best-selling initial product we ever had, Lazaridis said. We could not meet demand. And then, almost as quickly, the returns began. This is where BlackBerry made the decision that made everything else inevitable. By 2009, virtually every one of the roughly 1 million Storms that had shipped needed to be replaced, and a great many of the replacement units were being returned as well. It is a meeting at Verizon, and John Stratton, the carrier's chief marketing officer, has called Lazaridis and Balsillie in for a reckoning. You are going to make us whole on the money we have spent fixing your Storm problems, Stratton tells them flatly, or we will revisit our entire supplier relationship with you. This is your responsibility. This is your fault, not ours. Verizon wanted close to $500 million. RIM did not have that kind of cash, sitting free, and offered a package of concessions. Instead, free repairs, upgrade programs, and crates of complimentary devices. The carrier that had personally offered RIM its escape route into the future was now an adversary, and the largest carrier in America had learned not to trust RIM with its biggest bets. This was the moment the mood inside the company began to change. The confidence of 2007, the easy certainty that they would be fine, curdled into something tighter and more defensive. The phone designed to kill the iPhone had very nearly killed RIM's own reputation instead. You would think that would have been the warning that changed everything. It was not. And this pattern would repeat, quietly and consistently and with rising desperation, for the next several years. Every single response BlackBerry attempted was logical, defensible, and doomed. It launched the Storm 2 in 2009, convinced the first Storm had merely been an early draft of a sound idea. Lazaridis refused to view the original as a failure at all. He saw it as RIM's first honest attempt at a new technology, a phone with a good camera, a strong speaker, and a replaceable battery. By 2010, the American carriers had lost interest entirely. It launched a tablet, the Playbook, in 2011, rushed to market so badly that it shipped without a native email application, the one single thing BlackBerry was supposed to do, better than any company alive. To read your email on a BlackBerry tablet, you had to tether it wirelessly to a BlackBerry phone. The reviews were merciless. RIM later wrote down hundreds of millions of dollars in unsold Playbook inventory, crates of tablets nobody wanted, a physical monument to a strategy that had lost its way. Each new product was an answer to the last quarter's problem, and the last quarter's problem was never the one that was actually killing the company. It missed the industry's move to fast 4G networks. Lazaridis had warned, again, that 4G radios would drain batteries too quickly, and once again he was technically correct, and once again it turned out that nobody cared in the slightest. Samsung had already shipped a 4G phone. Apple was months from its own. RIM was a one-product company with a damaged brand and an aging lineup, watching the parade pass from the curb. And then the floor fell out of the price as well. Cheap Android phones flooded the low end of the market while Apple owned the luxurious high end, and BlackBerry was squeezed from both directions at once, too expensive to compete on price and too dated to compete on desire. In the developing markets where BlackBerry's cheap, data-light phones had found a second life, even that foothold began to crumble as low-cost Androids arrived. The recurring service fees, the beautiful high-margin engine that had funded the whole empire, started to thin as carriers and customers drifted away. The market had quietly decided that battery life and security and typing speed were all prices. It was perfectly happy to pay for a sheet of glass that could do everything. Apple had reset what people expected a phone to be. Conservation did not matter anymore. Cost did not matter. That, Lazaridis later admitted with something close to awe, was their genius. By 2012, the partnership that had built the entire company finally fractured. The strain had been building for years. An accounting scandal over backdated stock options had cast a shadow over both founders in the late 2000s, and the loss of the NTP patent fight had drained both cash and confidence at exactly the moment the company most needed a steady, united command. Now Balsillie wanted to pivot toward instant messaging software and license BlackBerry's famous BBM platform across every phone, iPhones and Androids included, turning the company's most beloved feature into a service that lived everywhere. Lazaridis opposed him and argued, right to the very end, for the keyboard. The two men who had run the company in flawless tandem for 2 decades could no longer agree on what the company even was. Both of them left the thing they had founded. RIM brought in a new chief executive, Thorsten Heinz, who finally committed to a modern touchscreen platform called BlackBerry 10. Built on operating system technology, RIM had quietly acquired years earlier and then failed to deploy fast enough. Inside the company, the old argument refused to die. In a board meeting at the Waterloo headquarters, executives debated whether to lead with a touchscreen phone or a keyboard one. Lazaridis, still on the board, argued that abandoning the keyboard to chase yet another slab of glass was too great a risk, that it meant surrendering the company's last real advantage. The board compromised, agreeing to build both but to launch the all-touchscreen Z10 first. When that device finally reached the market in January 2013, even RIM's own insiders privately agreed it was at least 2 years too late. The world had already chosen. People were locked into an iPhone or an Android, surrounded by the apps and the photos and the daily habits of those ecosystems, and a competent, beautiful, secure BlackBerry was simply no longer a question anyone was asking. BlackBerry had assumed its loyal customers would wait for it. They did not. That same year, the company surrendered its old name and became, simply, BlackBerry. The brand had outlived the empire that built it. Today, BlackBerry still exists, but not as a maker of phones. It abandoned hardware entirely in 2016 and reinvented itself as a cybersecurity and embedded software company. Its code now running quietly inside the dashboards and safety systems of millions of cars rather than in the hands of presidents and bankers. At its peak, around 2009, BlackBerry controlled close to half of the United States smartphone market, counted tens of millions of devoted subscribers worldwide, and at one point held roughly 20% of the entire global smartphone operating system market. By the end of 2016, the company sold so few of its own phones that its global market share rounded to 0. The keyboard that Mike Lazaridis sculpted ridge by ridge is gone. The blinking red light that taught a generation to check its pockets is gone. The company that made the entire professional world feel its phone buzz now survives only as software you will use every day and never once see. BlackBerry did not fall because it failed to see the future. Mike Lazaridis pried the future open with his own hands, looked inside it, named it correctly, and warned his own staff about it in the summer of 2007. BlackBerry fell because the three things that made it dominant, the keyboard and the battery and the secure network, were the exact three things it could not bring itself to give up. The more clearly the company understood its own strengths, the more tightly those strengths held it in place. A moat deep enough to keep every rival out is also deep enough to keep you in. By the time BlackBerry understood that the wall it had built for protection had become the wall it was trapped behind, the future it had held in its hands belonged to someone else.